Greetings, everyone. It's my pleasure to present this work on a systematic approach to achieving tight worst-case latency and high performance under predictable cache coherence. This work was done with my advisor, Professor Hiren Patel at the University of Waterloo. So as highlighted in the previous talk, cache-based multi-core platforms are being deployed in safety-critical real-time domains such as automotive, avionics, and robotics to satisfy the demand for high computation power. However, it is well established that the microarchitecture of current multi-core platforms poses some threats to their timing predictability guarantees. This is primarily attributed to timing interferences on shared hardware resources such as shared memory levels and interconnects. This talk focuses on shared data communication between software tasks running on different cores. Such communication exercises the shared hardware resources. As a result, this makes the timing analysis of shared data communication a challenge. This is because analyzing the timing of a core's access to shared data must take into account one, the timing interference on shared hardware, and two, the memory state of shared data due to prior memory activity from other cores. So prior works on achieving predictable shared data communication resort to one of three following techniques as shown. A common theme across these techniques is that they achieve timing predictability by enforcing constraints on data caching and execution, which limit their average case performance. There's been recent attention on using hardware cache coherence mechanisms to support predictable shared data communication. At a high level, hardware cache coherence enables multiple cores to correctly access the most up-to-date shared data and allow multiple cores to simultaneously cache shared data in their private caches. Since hardware cache coherence does not impose any constraints on caching and execution, prior works have shown that these mechanisms offer much higher average case performance than other approaches. However, despite the average case performance benefits of predictable hardware cache coherence mechanisms, they appear in less favorable light for adoption due to their high worst-case latencies. Worst-case latency estimates are crucial in determining real-time task schedules for deployment. To highlight this, the slide shows the gap between the worst-case latency trends between cache bypassing and prior predictable cache coherence mechanisms. Worst-case latency under cache bypassing scales linearly with core count. On the other hand, the timing analysis from prior predictable cache coherence works showed that the worst-case latency scales quadratically with core count. To put this into perspective, consider an 8-core multi-core configuration. The worst-case latency gap between cache bypassing and predictable cache coherence mechanisms is 16x. To make predictable cache coherence mechanisms acceptable data communication mechanisms for multi-core real-time systems, this work describes a systematic approach towards designing predictable cache coherence mechanisms that exhibit the same linear worst-case latency trends as cache bypassing while still maintaining their performance advantages over cache bypassing and other approaches. This tightening of worst-case latency bridges the worst-case latency gap shown in the previous slide. This talk is divided into two parts. First, I will present an analysis framework that clearly identifies the reasons behind the high worst-case latency under predictable cache coherence. Guided by the insights from this analysis, the second part explores one design technique to achieve a balance between tight worst-case latency and high performance. This is the outline I'll follow for the rest of the talk. I'll first present some background on hardware cache coherence and predictable hardware cache coherence mechanisms, followed by details on the analysis framework and one technique to tighten the worst case latency. And then I'll conclude with some observations on the evaluation. So this work focuses on snooping bus-based cache coherence mechanisms, which are appropriate for multi-core configurations with 4 to 16 cores. Such core count configurations are representative of those used for real-time systems. In snooping bus-based cache coherence mechanisms, all cores and shared memory observe memory activity from other cores by snooping a shared bus. Based on the memory activity observed, the cores and shared memory perform necessary actions. A key component of the cache coherence mechanism is the cache coherence protocol, which is a state machine that enforces certain rules that maintain correct versions of cache lines communicated between cores. In this slide, I show the classic modified shared invalid cache coherence protocol, or the MSI cache coherence protocol. The protocol has 3 coherent states which capture information about the access permissions and information about the data state of the cache line. And there are transitions between coherent states that are triggered on memory events observed on the snooping bus. The three states are modified, that denotes read and write access permissions on data, and the core has modified the data contents. Shared denotes that the core only has read-only permissions and has not modified the data, and invalid denotes the unavailability of the cache line data. So prior works on designing timing predictable cache coherence mechanisms modified conventional cache coherence mechanisms to make them amenable to timing analysis. These modifications were directed at the protocol level and at the microarchitecture level. At the protocol level, additional states in the form of transient states were added to indicate pending memory operations to shared resources, such as the shared bus and shared memory. At the microarchitecture level, additional hardware structures were added for predictable shared hardware management. So with this background in place, the first part of the talk describes the analysis framework that establishes the reasons behind the high worst case latency under predictable cache coherence. The analysis framework has two components. The first is the modeling component, which describes a general formal model of cache coherence protocols. Note that this modeling is not specific to any prior protocol implementation. The second component is the asymptotic latency analysis, which uses the formal model of the coherence protocol and establishes the relationship between protocol features and the growth function of the worst case latency with core count. I will refer to this growth function of the worst case latency as the worst case asymptotic latency. So the modeling component models coherent states and transitions between states. A coherent state encodes three pieces of information as shown in this slide. Access permissions denote read and write permissions of the cache line. Data state denotes whether the core has modified the cache line data contents. And data authority denotes whether a core can send data contents of a cache line to another core requesting for the same cache line. Coherence transitions are state changes triggered on memory events observed on the snooping bus. There are four types of memory events. Owned read and owned write are memory events caused due to a read and write request from a core. And other read and other write memory events are read and write requests caused caused by another core that is observed on the snooping bus. So as an example, this slide shows the PMSI protocol represented using our modeling. The modified state has write access permissions, dirty data state, and active data authority. The shared has read access permissions, clean data state, and passive data authority, and the invalid state has invalid access permissions. The transitions between states are triggered on memory events as shown here. The second component is the asymptotic latency analysis. First, some preliminaries. We assume a multi-core platform with an inclusive memory hierarchy. Cores communicate with the shared memory through shared request and data buses. These buses deploy a TDM arbitration where each core is allocated a constant number of slots. During a slot, a core has exclusive access to the shared bus and memory. As a result, the asymptotic arbitration latency scales linearly with core count. Cores can also communicate data with each other through direct cache-to-cache communication interfaces such as point-to-point links. Such interfaces are available in ARM and Intel platforms. So the main result of our analysis derives the two ingredients under which the worst case latency of a memory request under cache coherence scales quadratically with core count. The first ingredient is when a core's request causes another core to respond with shared bus accesses. And the second ingredient is when these responses must complete before the requesting core can complete its request. We arrive at this, or the analysis arrives at this result in the following steps. First, the analysis derives scenarios based on protocol features that result in a core to respond with shared bus accesses to another core's request. Using this subresult, the analysis then proves that for correct execution, such responses must complete before the requesting core receives the requested data. Again, using the previous subresult, the analysis then proves that there exists a worst case scenario where the requesting core waits for all remaining cores to complete their shared bus responses. Finally, since shared bus access latency scales linearly with core count, waiting for n-1 shared bus accesses results in quadratic worst case asymptotic latency. In the interest of time, I will focus on the first subresult. So our analysis arrives at the following conditions under which a core performs shared bus accesses in response to another core's request. A scenario where data state of a cache line changes from dirty to clean, or data authority of a cache line changes from active to passive across all cores. Then a core's memory request causes another core to perform shared bus accesses. I'll apply these conditions to the PMSI protocol and show that such a scenario exists in the PMSI protocol. As a result, the worst case asymptotic latency of a memory request under PMSI scales quadratically with core count. So consider a two-core setup where initially a core has a cache line in the modified state and another core has a cache line in the invalid state. The core that has the cache line in the invalid state performs a read request. So the corresponding events observed on the bus is other read and own read respectively. Based on the PMSI protocol transitions, the coherent state of the cache line in both cores transition to the shared state. So from the core that has the cache line modified state goes to the S state, and the core that's making the request goes to the S state. Since M has dirty data state and S has clean data state, the data state of the cache line across all cores has changed from dirty to clean. In summary, if a cache coherence protocol exhibits a scenario that satisfies the condition described, then the worst case asymptotic latency of a memory request scales quadratically with core count. A key benefit of the analysis framework is that it can be applied to different protocols and concisely identify the corresponding worst case latency trend. For example, we applied our analysis framework on the PMESI protocol and found that the worst case asymptotic latency of a memory request under PMESI also scales quadratically with core count. Now we move to the second part of the talk, where I will describe one technique that aims to achieve a balance between tight worst case latency and high performance in the form of careful protocol changes. At a high level, our technique of protocol changes modifies the state transitions such that a core's request does not cause another core to respond with shared bus accesses. This change to ingredient 1 eliminates ingredient 2, which results in the linear growth of worst case latency. To put this into perspective, in order to tighten the worst case latency of a memory request under PMSI, our protocol changes focuses on modifying the transitions from modified to shared and invalid to shared. Recall that these transitions resulted in a scenario that satisfied the condition for quadratic worst case latency. Note that careless protocol changes can result in a protocol that has tight worst case latency but poor average case performance guarantees. As an example, one protocol change is to simply remove the shared state. Such a protocol will result in linear worst case asymptotic latency. However, the lack of the shared state prevents multiple cores from simultaneously having the same cache line in their private caches, resulting in poor average case performance. So one approach to guide the protocol changes that effectively balance tight worst case latency and high average case performance is to leverage information about data communication between cores and shared memory on the state transitions. Such information can be generated using the data state and data authority informations of coherent states. There are 4 data communication events: receive data from memory, receive data from core, send data to memory, and send data to core. This slide shows the PMSI protocol annotated with these data communication events. For example, let's take the transition from invalid to shared. A core that performs an own read first moves to a transient state that denotes that it's waiting for the requested data. And then when it receives the data either from the memory or from another core, it moves to the shared state. Notice that the data communication events uncover a key feature regarding this I to S transition. In particular, the I to S transition receives data from another core if and only if another core has the same cache line in the modified state. This is because the modified state in the PMSI protocol has dirty data state and active data authority. As a result, it is sufficient to modify the M to S transition and a portion of the I to S transition that receives data from another core. The resulting PMSI star protocol shows the corresponding protocol changes. Applying the conditions derived from the framework, we can prove that this protocol does not exhibit any scenarios that satisfy quadratic worst-case asymptotic latency. A clear observation is that the PMSI star protocol retains the shared state, unlike the previous protocol that modified the shared state or that removed the shared state for tighter worst-case latency. Now, it's important to note that the protocol changes trade some average case performance for tight worst case latency by limiting the number of scenarios where multiple cores can simultaneously cache the same cache line in the shared state. I will describe this performance trade-off in the evaluation. So in summary, data communication events on state transitions can guide the protocol changes such that they preserve performance while tightening the worst case latency. We have applied these pro protocol changes to the PMSI and the PMSI protocols, resulting in the PMSI star and PMSI star protocols, respectively. Our evaluation uses the GEM5 microarchitectural simulator. We simulate multi-core configurations with different core counts. In this talk, I will focus only on the 8-core configuration. We use Splash2 and synthetic workloads. So the first evaluation result is the observed worst case latency bounds. The observed worst case latency is the maximum latency observed across all memory requests. The analytical worst case latency bounds are derived from the timing analysis. We highlight two key observations. First, for all approaches, including the new protocols obtained from protocol changes, the observed worst case latency is within the analytical worst case latency. Second, the new protocols have the same worst case latency as the cache bypassing approach, which is a 94% reduction compared to the original predictable cache coherence mechanisms. The second evaluation is the average case performance speedups for Splash2 workloads. We highlight two key observations. First, the new protocols continue to maintain their performance advantage over cache bypassing while having the same worst case latency. The PMSI star and PMSI star have an average performance speedup across all Splash2 workloads of 52% and 36% respectively. Second, the protocol changes trade between 6 and 13% reduction performance reduction for tighter worst case latency compared to the original predictable cache coherence mechanisms. However, we believe this performance loss is accepted given the worst case latency benefits provided by the protocol changes. In conclusion, this work presents a framework, an analysis framework that establishes the relationship between protocol design and high worst case latency. Guided by the analysis framework, I described one technique in the form of careful protocol changes to achieve tight worst case latency while retaining high average case performance over cache bypassing and other approaches. The resulting protocols have the same worst case latency as cache bypassing and maintain up to 5x performance speedup over cache bypassing. The protocol changes trade 6 and 13% average case performance load on compared to the original protocols for a 94% reduction in the worst case latency. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.